Yeah, so just go ahead and mute yourself if you're not speaking. I'm gonna give people a couple of minutes to roll in before I start. So I'd be happy to hear from a few of you. Say if we give ourselves about till 5:35, we can do a few introductions. Anyone who'd like to just come on and share a little bit about yourself and your garden. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about fruit trees and fruit tree care. So if you have any general, not questions, but if there's something you'd like to know about fruit tree care that can kind of guide me today as I'm speaking, I can try to include that. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, just if you're on video, you can raise your hand. And yeah, just say your name, where you're from, tell us a little bit about your garden and what you're looking to learn today about fruit trees. And I see Swada, you raised your hand, so go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Rishi. Thank you for doing this. I live in Glendora. I'm Swada. This is Ashish. Hello. And we have a few fruit trees, maybe like 10 in our yard, and they are all healthy. They're just not growing. They have attained, like, they grow probably maybe an inch or two a year. So my concern is that, okay, they are being watered, they are being fertilized, but, the soil seems okay, but maybe it's the soil. But my fruit trees are taking forever to grow. Some of them have started giving fruits, but they're limited numbers and smaller size. But other than that, they look healthy. When you look at the foliage, when you look at their leaves, they are nice green and they look happy.
Okay, so you're just looking for some general information about how to get your trees healthier and maybe how to determine if your soil's healthy under your fruit trees. So that's definitely, those are both things that I'm planning on going over today. So thank you for sharing, and hopefully we'll answer what your concerns are. So if you're just joining us, I'm just giving us a couple minutes to do introductions. If you'd want to unmute yourself and share about who you are and where you're from and what you're learning, what you want to learn today about fruit tree care, I'd be happy to hear from about 2 more people. So if anyone's interested, just unmute yourself and hopefully you don't run into someone else when you start speaking. Anyone?
Okay, Rishi, this is Jacqueline.
Hi, Jacqueline.
Do you want us to use, when we're asked, do you want us to raise our hand on that, where you click on participants and then you can raise hand on the little button down at the bottom?
I wasn't sure if we still had that feature. Is that showing up?
Yeah, you check,
okay.
Click on participants, and then the raise hand is down in the lower right-hand corner.
Okay,
and then
great.
There's a whole list of all of us. Anyway, yeah, I like her question, and I also wanted to say I loved your video with your mom today. That was great. That was great.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Okay, yeah, so like Jacqueline said, we'll take one more introduction here. If you click on the participants button on the bottom of the screen, then a little pop-up will show up, and you should be able to click a button that says raise hand. So if you'd like to do your introduction, go ahead and raise your hand that way, and I'll be able to see it. Okay, Bharat Patel.
Hi, this is Bharat Patel. I live in La Mirada, and thank you for getting us started, I think earlier this year, with our garden. We have finished everything. We have a few fruit trees. Everything is doing okay except for my avocado tree. The leaves are turning really brown, and I'm not sure if it's the weather. I'm watering it at least daily. What the issue is. So I would just like some help on that if possible. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bharat. Actually, I did a consultation for Bharat, I guess at the end of last year, and we did a design for his garden, and I'm glad. I was actually going to follow up with you and see how things are going. So I'm glad to hear you got it done. That's awesome. Okay, so I think I'm going to get started here. So just a little bit of an introduction again. Most of you, I'm sure, know me. I'm Farmer Rishi, and we're offering this monthly members gardening lesson and Q&A through our nonprofit organization, Sarvodaya Institute. So if you don't know about that, I'm going to put a link to our website up in the chat. It's upliftmentofall.org. That's our website. And so we're going to be doing this every month, and it's going to be offered to this time we're offering it to anyone because we just want to let people know about it. But we're going to be offering this monthly gardening lesson and Q&A to our members. And membership starts at just $5 a month, and that's going to support our nonprofit organization. If you don't know, we're based in Los Angeles, and we have a couple different demonstration gardens. We have one at my parents' home called the Growing Home. It's like a urban or a suburban home demonstration garden. We have a small urban farm, and then we also have a public garden at a church called the Growing Commons. And so we maintain all these gardens through our nonprofit organization. We do a lot of community outreach and education using those gardens both in person and online. And so we're trying to build up a base of membership for our organization so we can keep our work going. So if you'd like to join us for these monthly member gardening lessons and Q&As, go to that link and you can sign up to be a member for just $5 a month. And then we will message you every month. We're going to try to set a schedule, actually. This time, I just kind of chose a random date, but starting from next month, I'm going to try to do this on the second Wednesday of every month at 5:30 p.m. Okay, so if you want to join us, second Wednesday of every month at 5:30 p.m. If nothing comes up, and that should remain the same. And again, just $5 a month is what we're asking for, and that's a donation, tax-deductible donation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started on our topic of the month, and I'm going to try to keep these topics kind of related to where we are in the season. So right now, most of you will be joining us from California, but I'm going to try to keep it broad so people who are joining from around the nation can benefit as well. But either way, we're in the middle of the season, middle of summer, and so this is like the hottest part of the year, right? This is not a time really that we're going to be doing a lot of planting of vegetables. Vegetable planting would have been done a couple months ago. The next season of vegetable planting is going to be in about, depending on how the weather goes, usually we'll start planting seeds for the fall winter season around October in California, or sorry, September. Yeah, September, October in California. If you're on the East Coast or somewhere in the Midwest, actually right now might be getting close to when you want to be starting seeds for your fall and winter season. But I thought today would be this time of the year would be a really nice time just to talk about fruit tree care, because it's something that we can really do at any time of the year, and not too much else going on for us in the garden, so it's a great time to give a little bit of extra love to our trees. Okay, so the main thing that we're going to look at when we're talking about fruit tree care, and this is going to come down to really anything in the garden. We want to look at the health of our soil in our gardens and under our fruit trees, right? The health of the soil is going to be the most important thing to the health of our trees. Okay, and so I'm going to give you a few suggestions as to, like Swada had mentioned, had asked, how do we determine the health of our soil, right? And of course, you can send your soil into a lab if you want to get some numbers that will help you determine whether the soil is in a healthy state or not. But actually, we can do this very easily just with our senses. There's plenty of ways to determine how our soil is doing just with our hands and our eyes and our nose. So let's just talk about that for a little bit. So the first thing is what I would suggest you do with your fruit trees and with any of the soil in your garden is just do a quick test on how quickly your soil is able to drink water. Okay, so one of the things that I find, you know, most of the time, like I would say like 90% of the time when people have problems with their fruit trees, they tell me a very similar story, right? And it goes something like this. It's like, oh, I moved into this house, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and these fruit trees were already there. And when we first moved in, the trees were giving us beautiful fruit. And then slowly over the years, you know, the fruit has declined, the trees are not doing well, they're, you know, they're looking dry, the leaves are yellow, they're looking diseased, and they're just not, and, you know, in many cases, they've just completely stopped fruiting, right? And so I want you to think about, like, what are some of the processes that have happened over that time, like over those 10, 20 years? Like, why has that tree just lost its health and its vigor? Okay, so basically, you know, the most common theme as to why trees are declining is how we're taking care of them, right? Because what most people do is every year the tree is dropping leaves, and we're raking up those leaves that are under the tree, and we're throwing them in the green bin, or we're throwing them in the trash, right? So if you think about what's happening, right, the tree is putting all this effort gathering sunlight, photosynthesizing through its leaves, and then at some point in the year it starts to drop those leaves and kind of is storing the energy that it's gathered in the green leaves by dropping them to the ground, and so that way they can feed the soil, and then the tree can reabsorb those nutrients later, right? It's got its own system of capturing the energy that it's taken in from the sun and storing that energy so that it's available for it later. And actually that actually helps the tree build up its energy over time, right? The leaves are dropping, they're feeding the soil is gathering energy, it's feeding that to the tree, and now the tree can produce more leaves, the leaves are dropping more leaves, and now this cycle is being created where the tree is gathering more and more energy. And so over time, the soil under the tree should actually get healthier and healthier. But instead what's happening is we're raking those leaves up and we're throwing them away. And now every year the tree has to pull from its reserves to create those leaves and to create that fruit, especially fruit. Fruit takes a lot of energy for a tree to produce. So every time a tree produces leaves and produces fruit, if that energy doesn't somehow get back to the tree, back to the soil, then over the years, the tree's health is going to decline. And actually, when I went to Bharat's house, this is exactly what had happened to a couple of his trees, which he ended up removing some of them because they actually, I think one of them actually fell over, just like fell over in the wind one day. So this is what happens to most of our fruit trees. And so really, you know, from a very basic point, we want to start to feed the soil, take care of the soil that's under the tree so that the tree can start to gather up energy again. Okay, so the first thing, I mentioned doing a little test to determine where your soil is at right now. The first thing I'd like you to do is just go outside and take your hose and put it on like a medium flow, and just let the hose run under the tree for a couple minutes. And what I want you to see is how the water is moving on the soil when you turn that hose on. Okay, if your soil is unhealthy, if it's compact, if it's dry, what usually will happen is the soil will form into little puddles, and then that water will quickly start to run down. You know, if there is any slope, then the water will start to run down the slope. If there isn't a slope, the water will just kind of pool up and slowly spread across the surface of the soil. So if you see that happening, what that means is that even though you're watering, like maybe you have sprinklers, maybe you even have a drip system, even when you're watering, very little water is actually reaching the tree because the soil is so hard and so compact and doesn't have any microbes, doesn't have any organic matter in it, that none of the water is actually able to reach the roots of the tree. So even though you're watering, you may be watering for hours and hours and hours. And I've had people tell me this all the time, right? Like, oh, I water my tree, you know, for hours and hours and hours, and it dries up, and it, you know, or it dried up and it died. And what's happening again is that the soil is so hard, it's not able to accept water, that no matter how much you water on the top, the water doesn't go in, or it goes in very shallow, and then when the sun comes, all that water just evaporates. Okay, so that's what's happening in most circumstances. So just look at how water travels when you're putting it on the soil. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to turn the water pressure down on the hose. Turn it down to a very low trickle. And I want you to find that point where as the water is trickling out of the hose, that the water is absorbing into the soil. Okay, that's going to tell you how fast your soil can actually drink. Okay, if your soil is in a very unhealthy state, just like when we're in an unhealthy state, we can't just like be eating lots of food. We can't be drinking, like chugging water, right? Like if we're sick, we take water in like very slow sips. And the same thing with our soil. If our soil's unhealthy, it's not been taken care of. You can think of it like your soil's a little sick. And so it can only take water very slowly. Okay, so find that point where with the hose, where we turn the water down as very, very low, and find the point where the water is actually absorbing into the soil. And that's going to tell you how fast, how you should be watering your tree. Okay, if the soil can only absorb water very slowly, then I want you to only water very, very slowly. If you can turn the hose up a bit and the water is still sinking in, then you're okay to water a little bit more quickly. Your soil's at a state where it's able to really, chug more water down. And that means that if that's happening, then you shouldn't really be having too many problems with your fruit trees, because they should be quite healthy. Okay, so that's just a little test. The other thing you want to do is just, try to dig into the soil. Are you able to dig in with a tool? Are you able to dig in with are you able to dig in with your hand first? Is it loose enough that you can dig with your hand? Or do you need a tool? Do you need a little trowel? Or do you need a pickaxe? Like how hard is it to break into your soil? Because however hard it is for you to get in the soil, that's how hard it is for the roots of the tree to get into the soil. That's how hard it is for water to get into the soil. And then we're just going to look at color. Is it more toward like a dark chocolate color, or is it more toward like a light wood color, right? Dark chocolate color, more towards a dark color, is going to mean the soil is healthier. And we should also have an aroma. If your soil is really healthy, it'll have this nice, very mushroomy aroma. So those are all ways for you to examine where your soil is at currently. Okay, so it's just some very basic things I'm going to suggest. Number one, the soil around your tree should never be exposed to the sun. And really, most of the soil in your garden should not really be exposed to the sun. You should keep the soil around your tree covered with some kind of mulch. And a mulch is basically anything that's like a material that you're using as a blanket over the soil. So that could be wood chips, that could be straw, that could be compost, that could be leaves. So normally a tree would create its own mulch. It'll be dropping its leaves and it'll be covering the soil with its own leaves. This could also be plants. You could put other plants around your tree, and those plants will cover the soil for you. They'll also help feed the soil. So you want to cover the soil around your tree, and actually cover most of the soil in your garden. So for most people, what I would recommend, and if you've seen I've been posting a little video, some videos on Instagram, because I'm putting in a garden. I'm at my in-laws' house this week and last week. So I've been putting in a garden over here, and I put some videos on my Instagram of what I'm doing. And so what I'm doing here is what I would recommend most of you do is, if you haven't fed your soil in a long time or ever, then what I would suggest you do is put several inches of compost. Okay, and compost you can either buy in bags from a hardware store or a nursery, or if you're going to do a very large area, you can find a local compost supplier. So if you're in LA, there's one, I'm going to type it into the chat here. It's called Cal Blend Soil. And there's another one called Whittier Fertilizer. If you were doing a large area, you can buy compost in bulk from these compost suppliers. If you're not in LA, you can look up in your area who is a compost supplier. And so what I would suggest you do is put at least 3 inches of compost on the soil around your tree in about a 6-foot diameter. 6-foot diameter. Okay, so you want to cover the soil all around your tree with compost about 3 inches in a 6-foot diameter. All right, so that's the first thing we're going to do, just to feed the soil, cover it, and introduce some organic matter, which is, organic matter is basically anything that's made out of carbons. That would be leaves, that would be wood, that would be bodies of of animals. We are carbon, primarily carbon beings. So any manure is also carbon. Carbon is a very important, it's like the, how would I say this? So if you could, one of the ways you can think about this is if you're just looking at your dirt, okay, your dirt is like your bricks, okay, and your carbon is like your mortar. So you have the bricks, you're missing the mortar. So you're bringing in compost that's going to give you the mortar to take those bricks together and build structures in the soil. And the beings that are going to build those structures are the microbes, and compost is also full of microbes. So by adding compost, we're taking the bricks we already have, we're adding the mortar that is in the carbon in the compost, and then the masons, who are the microbes in the compost. So we have those 3 together. They're going to actually take our soil, which is now all these, these particles that are pressed together, and they're going to take them and they're going to pull them apart. They're going to stack them together. They're going to build these structures that allow water and air and nutrients into the soil. Okay, so 3 inches of compost, and then on top, at least 3 inches, and probably no more than 6. Okay, so at least 3 inches of compost around your tree, and then on top of that, 3 inches of wood chips. Okay, wood chip mulch. And so what the wood chips are going to do, they're going to shelter even the compost, prevent the compost from drying out. And that's it's like having a sheet and then a blanket. We're just creating that right layering on the soil surface for decomposition to happen, for microbes to be able to propagate, for moisture to be retained. And with this simple layering, 3 inches of compost, 3 inches of wood chips, we're going to see significant benefits to the soil and significant benefits to our trees' health over time. And this is actually something that you would want to do if your trees are in a really bad state, dire state. This is something I would suggest you do probably for 3 years in a row. As that compost breaks down and the wood chips start to break down, then the next year add, again, 3 inches of compost, 3 inches of wood chips. And after about 3 years, you should be in a really, really healthy state of soil, and you should see those trees really starting to bounce back. And really, if you're even, no matter how dire the state of your tree is, like if it's just barely hanging on for dear life, as long as it's not totally dead, you have a chance of bringing it back this way. Okay, so that's what I'm just going to suggest as a general thing for you all today. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is water, right? So we talked about the hose and finding that that place where you can see how quickly the water is infiltrating into the soil. And so that's going to be very important for us to understand how quickly our soil is able to drink water. And then when we're providing the soil with the tree with water, what we want to do is we basically want to with watering for most plants, what we want to do is we want to have this kind of fluctuation in how moist the soil is. Okay, we never want it to be like always moist. And then of course we don't want it to be always dry. We actually want to bounce back and forth between moist and dry, moist and dry, moist and dry. So if your trees are getting watered on a daily basis, and this is often the case if you have a tree planted in a lawn. right? If you have a tree planted in a lawn and you're watering that lawn with sprinklers every day, there's a high chance that your tree is not going to do well. And planting a tree in a lawn is almost never a good idea. If you have your tree in a lawn, you want to remove the lawn about, again, 6-foot diameter around the tree trunk. Get the grass away from the lawn, get the sprinklers off of the trunk of the tree. If you have a sprinkler watering the trunk of your tree, you're going to get disease, you're going to get fungus, you're going to get microbes starting to actually decompose the bark of the tree. And the bark of the tree is the protective layer of the tree. Once the bark gets decomposed, then you're at the inside layer where the nutrients are actually going up and down. You get to that point, the tree is going to die. So don't water the trunk of your tree. When you're putting water, don't water on the trunk of your tree, right? The tree's roots that actually take up water, they're not right below the trunk. They're out here usually. And there are these small fibrous roots around the tree, like away from the trunk. So when we're watering, we don't water near the trunk, we water away from the trunk. Okay, so water away from the trunk, water very slowly. Get those, don't take the lawn out from under the tree. The other thing you want to watch for, just general, you want to watch for, if you have a mow and blow gardener coming by and you have and he's weed whacking, he's got that trimmer, the string trimmer that is whacking, and and you have a lawn or something right up to your tree. If he's weed whacking right around the trunk of your tree and he's hitting the trunk of your tree with the weed whacker, again, he's damaging the bark, and then he's going to start to damage the inner layer, and then your tree is going to be in trouble again. So get the weed whacker away from the trunk of the tree. Okay, so how do we actually want to water the tree? Again, we want to water very slowly. We want to water very deeply, and then we want to let the soil dry out. Okay, so water deeply, and then let the soil dry out. Water deeply, let the soil dry out. How long should you water? How often should you water is going to depend on the state that your tree is currently in. Okay, so and the state that your soil is currently in. If your soil is in a poor state, your tree is in a poor state, then yeah, I want you to water deeply. I want you to turn that hose on a slight trickle, and I want you to let it run for like maybe 3-4 hours. And then I want you to wait like a week maybe, and just keep checking that the soil right around the tree. Just stick your finger down in there. When you can't feel moisture, then go ahead and water again. Again, slow trickle, get it deeply soaked, and then again, wait, okay? Once your soil is to a healthier state and your tree is in a healthier state, or if you have a really mature old tree and you're trying to water a really mature old tree, then I want you to go even longer, same slow trickle, but I want you to let it run for like half a day and then not water it for 2-3 weeks. Okay, so we're trying to make that deep water, dry cycle even longer. And we're trying to really get the soil moist down deep, and we're trying to draw those roots of the tree down as deep as we can. Once the tree's roots get nice and super deep, then the tree is actually feeding, as it's photosynthesizing, it's feeding sugars into the soil, it's loosening the soil, its roots are getting down there, breaking up the soil. So the tree itself is actually going to do a lot to increase the soil's health as long as we give it this nice push in the beginning and we water it the right way. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to say is pruning is also really important to a tree's health in most cases. So if you think, if one of your thoughts is, I shouldn't prune my tree, I don't want to mess with it, it's unnatural to prune, that's not the right idea, okay? These trees, especially fruit trees, they've been developed by human breeding. They need pruning to actually maintain a good, healthy structure. So we do want to prune. I'm not going to go into pruning today. Right now is not really the season to prune. Pruning season was going to be in the winter for trees that go dormant, and then just in a cooler part of the year for trees that don't go dormant. Usually we'll prune things like citrus after they've fruited. Okay, so that way you're not pruning off any flowers or any fruit. Okay, so that's what I have prepared for you today. This is the format for these lessons is going to be like this. I'm going to have about half an hour of a prepared lesson, and then we're going to have a half an hour of Q&A. And so I'm going to open it up now for questions. I'm going to give preference today for people who are actually members of Sarvodaya Institute already. So if you are a member of Sarvodaya Institute, you could hit the raise hand button and ask your question. I'll be happy to answer. And once we've gone through the members, I'm going to open it up to questions from everyone. Okay, so anyone who's a member who has a question, hit the participants button. It'll open up that little window, and then raise your hand and I will call on you. Anyone? We'll give you like 5 seconds. Okay, Jacqueline. You gotta unmute. Jacqueline, can you unmute? She's getting there, I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple of quick things. What kind of plants would be the plants you might grow under the fruit trees? And would a soaker hose in a circle around the base be a good idea over the compost and under the chips? That's what I'm thinking. On trees that are about 7 years old. They're fairly young.
Okay, good questions. First question was what kind of plants would you plant under the fruit tree? Okay, so you definitely have a couple options here. If you're wanting to go the edible route, then what I would suggest is something that's going to cover the ground and is going to do well under the canopy of the tree. A lot of times what I'll do, especially during the summer, is I'll do like sweet potatoes under the fruit trees, because I can, just stick the tuber under the ground, and then the sweet potato has this, spreading, crawling habit that'll cover the surface and give the soil another layer of mulch, a plant mulch. So sweet potato is great. I think here, anything else? I do Jerusalem artichokes in the same way. I like the stuff under the fruit trees that you can just put, and they're very easy to, I don't have like vegetable plants that don't need a lot of babying, and they'll just come up and spread. Then for our garden in Claremont, what I'm doing here at my in-laws garden is I'm actually just putting native perennials under the fruit trees. So I just planted here a persimmon, I planted a tangerine, and I planted a fig and a pomegranate. So I put the tree, and then about 2 feet from the point that I planted the tree, I've put a couple native perennials and flowering perennials. And it's just a great way to fill up the space, get some more roots in the ground, also have flowers for beneficial insects, for bees, and then adding beauty to the garden. So, and just a little note on that, in terms of flowering plants, like for people love these plants with huge flowers. Insects and butterflies, they love plants with small flowers. So if you're trying to attract, beneficial insects to your garden, look for the native plants that have small flowers, right? Like a honeybee can't pollinate in amaryllis. Like the flower is like this big, and there's not actually a lot of pollen on there. Honeybee loves plants like lavender and African blue basil, and they love all these in California. All the native sages that we have, all these tiny little flowers, they're going to do a lot more to bring in beneficial insects than our people-bred giant flowers.
have found the ornamental sage attracts everything and does not attract the little animals. So it's like I have tons of it because it's so great.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. My grandpa, he's on the call here, and he's put sage and African basil all over his garden. He went from having to hand pollinate his zucchinis to now the bees do all the pollination for him. He's just been spreading flowers all over the garden. So very important. Did I do both your questions?
Yes.
Oh no, you asked about the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What you
Soaker hose.
described is perfect. The soaker hose is great. You don't even need to put it under the mulch. You can just put it right over, and just do it right on the surface, and it'll just soak all the way down through. Okay. And just while I remember here, on my personal website, farmerrishi.com, I have a drip irrigation guide that's up for sale. It's $50. If you want to put in a drip irrigation system, this is a 20-page guide that I wrote. It's very thorough. It's for people who want to do this on their own. You know, irrigation can seem very daunting and complicated. It's actually quite simple. So if you get that guide, it has all the instructions on, you know, the materials, how to design it, how to put it together, where to buy it, if that's the route you want to go. And if not, you can always get someone else to do it for you. Okay, Sarah Samuel.
Hi, Farmer Rishi. Thank you for doing this. My question is, are there any fruit trees that you can grow in a pot, or is it better just not to because they need more space?
Okay, you look a little bit like, I don't know what's the word here, but the answer is yes. Don't be like sad.
Okay.
You can definitely grow fruit trees in pots. I'm growing several fruit trees in pots in my patio. So the key thing here is you don't want a small pot, right? You want to have a nice big pot. I would recommend 25 gallons or more. And then I'm using these, and you know, in our nursery we're using these too. I'm using these fabric pots. I have them for sale through Sarvodaya Institute too. The great thing with the fabric pots, if you're growing a tree or any perennial in a pot, if you grow it in a ceramic or a wood or a plastic pot, you're going to get that root binding and the root circling at the bottom of the pot. And long term, what that means is that the roots will hit the bottom of the pot, they'll start circling, and they have nowhere to go. So that circling will just build up and build up and build up over time. And eventually you'll have this like thick layer of roots at the bottom. So what most people do when they're growing like a tree in a pot is they'll actually, after a couple of years, they'll break the pot. Then they'll cut all those roots off, and then they'll have to put the tree back in a new pot. That's a huge undertaking, and it's very dangerous for the tree as well. So if you're going to grow a tree in a pot, I highly recommend using a fabric pot. Fabric pot, the roots will never circle. As soon as they hit the edge of the pot, they're going to stop growing on the edges. They're going to start growing on the inside of the pot. So grow in a fabric pot. Put like, you know, 2 pieces of wood even underneath the fabric pot, so that there's good drainage and the roots don't try to come through the bottom. Because I realized that started happening at my place. So I put something underneath so that there's air on the bottom of the pot too. But there are certain trees that'll do better in pots than others. Okay, so where do you live, Sarah?
I live in like West LA.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, you have so many options. I'm growing fig in a pot. You can do all sorts of citrus in pots. You can do guavas. Guavas do well in pots. Mangoes can do well in pots. I'm growing I haven't got fruit yet, but it's doing quite well. I'm growing a dwarf, or not a dwarf, a miniature banana in a pot. And I'm expecting to get some fruit later this year. So you got all sorts of options.
Okay, cool. You guys sell that at your place, right? Some of those things?
Yeah, we sell the fabric pots. We have the soil. We have all the ingredients to mix your own potting soil, and we have the trees, so you can get everything.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And just as a reminder, if you are a member, you get discounts at the nursery as well. That's one of your benefits. Okay, any other members who have questions? Otherwise, we'll go, or Swada, are you a member? Not yet? Okay. Any other members have questions? All right, Swada, go ahead.
Okay, my question is about the deep root watering. What I have seen a couple of my friends do is they would put a PVC pipe about 2 inches of diameter into the ground, and then they would put a sprinkler pipe in it. So the water is not on the surface, it just goes down. And it's perforated pipe and it's open on the end. So the water goes a little deeper than just the surface. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's kind of doing something, but it's really not doing too much. The most important thing is just if the soil's compact and you put a pipe into the ground, like you might be able to put a little bit more water a little bit faster, but the most important thing is just putting that water on really slow and for a long time, so you really soak the soil and you soak it deep. So yeah, I don't see any reason to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And okay, I'm getting some questions in the chat here. I'm about to do the lasagna mulch that I learned in your course. Will this help with groundhogs, or do I need to do something further for this? Okay, so if you have groundhogs, or if you have moles, or if you have gophers, and you're planting fruit trees, that I've had this happen a couple times. You know, on a young tree, newly planted tree, a gopher can definitely come in and eat up all the roots and kill the tree. So if you have a problem with gophers, then what I would recommend is you can buy these gopher baskets. Again, if you're near Pomona, you can come by to our nursery. We have them. You want to get the 15-gallon size gopher basket. It's something that you'll have to dig the soil out, put the basket in, and then plant the tree in the basket. And that bigger basket is designed, from what I've heard, to actually break down after a couple years. The rust will open up the chain, and then the roots can go through and not have any problems. So it gives you protection for a few years while the tree is establishing. And then once it's established, if gopher comes and nibbles on a few roots here and there, it's not going to matter. All right, and I saw a question from Bharat. Did you want to come on?
Yeah, I put it on the chat it was about the fertilizer.
Okay, fertilizer. What type of fertilizer to use and when to fertilize fruit trees? Okay, great. All right, so if you do a nice layer of compost and a nice layer of mulch, and you do that for a couple years, that's going to do a huge benefit for your tree's health. The only thing that's missing in compost is a lot of the micronutrients, like a lot of the smaller minerals. And the other thing that you might need a little bit more of is nitrogen. Actually, you might need a little bit of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as well. But getting that base of carbon from the compost is really, really going to do a lot for you, because that compost has kind of everything in it in good quantities. If you want to give the tree a little bit something extra, right, give it a nice boost and keep it growing really, really healthy. What I would suggest, and this is what I suggest for most whether it's fruit trees or vegetables, get a nice balanced fish and seaweed based fertilizer. Sea fertilizers, like ocean based fertilizers, are really powerful because the ocean contains all of the minerals on Earth. So when you get seaweed or you get ocean fish, all of those ingredients have all of these minerals that are going to feed the microbes in your soil, feed your tree, and you'll get this, you'll start to see that the leaves of the tree actually have this beautiful like green gloss. So there's one product that I recommend. Again, we carry it in our nursery. It's called Neptune's Harvest Ocean Fish and Seaweed, I think. I'm going to type it in the chat here as well. Neptune's Harvest Fish and Seaweed. Okay, it's a very low, it's low nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, has a lot of minerals, and we don't really need a lot of that NPK. We just need a little bit because we're already adding lots of compost, and we're letting the leaves drop and not raking the leaves away, all that kind of stuff. So we're building up the soil anyways, but this will give you a little bit of a boost. What you can do with that is just dilute it at the ratio that it says in the bottle, which is, I believe, like 1 tablespoon to a gallon. And you can just spray that right on the leaves of the trees. And you could really do that fairly often. I mean, you could do it as often as once a week. You could do it every 2 weeks, just whenever you get time. That's gonna be a benefit to your trees. I also use this product. We use this at the farm. I'm gonna type it again in the chat. We use this product called Sea Crop. It is concentrated ocean minerals. So it's basically just ocean water that they've taken the salt out of. They take the sodium chloride out of it, and then they boil it down. And it's just all the other minerals that are in the ocean except the salt. And again, you can spray that on the leaves, or you can spray that directly on the soil. If you don't want to spend the money on these things, you don't need them. These are just extra bonus. Okay, especially if you want to speed things along a bit in the beginning, like you just put the compost, you put the mulch down, you want to help those things break down, you can use these products. If you're okay with waiting, then you can definitely do without them. And there's all sorts of ways, right, to make our soils super healthy without buying anything, right? Number one would be composting all of your food scraps from your kitchen, because all the food scraps have all sorts of nutrients, right? And if we're throwing them away, we're throwing those nutrients away. We can harvest them into the soil. So, all your food scraps, put them into your compost them. I just put some video up with my grandpa. He's showing his 11 worm bins. He composts everything with worms, and his garden does beautiful from that. You can gather materials from your neighbors that they're throwing away. You can get juice pulp, you can get coffee grounds, you can get the brewer's mash from breweries. Those are all going to contribute to a really healthy soil. If you can, I would say, try to bring in the Sea Crop at least one time, because a lot of these micronutrients are not available in a lot of the food, even though we're eating from the grocery store, whether it's organic or not. So if you can bring it in one time, great. Again, if not, no problem. You can also just go pick up seaweed from the ocean, go to the beach, harvest some seaweed, and throw it into your compost pile, or just chop it up and spread it in the yard. You'll get those minerals that way. All right, okay, let me see here. Would love to hear more on fruit trees that have already been staked and when to remove them. Saw your post this week and would love to hear more. Okay, yeah, this is a really important one. When you buy fruit trees from a commercial nursery, that's it. So not when you buy trees from my nursery. My nursery, we would never stake a tree. But when you buy trees from another nursery, what you find is usually you get a tree, it's like a straight pencil. It's got some foliage on the top, and then there's a stake, and it's like tied right up to the trunk. It's tied super tight. Okay, if you try to take that stake off, the tree has never had to support itself. Okay, the tree has been growing with this crutch, and the reason they do this is because people think that taller trees are better, so they try to grow the tree as tall as possible. They prune off all the lower branches, they tie it to the stake, and they try to keep all the growth going up, 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 up. And so it's called penciling. You literally see the trunk of the tree is like a pencil. It just goes straight up like that. A tree's trunk should not be a pencil. A tree's trunk should be like a skirt. You know, it should kind of come down and widen at the bottom. So, of course, we can't always buy trees that are in the the best shape. So we have to deal with what we have available to us. So when you're planting a young tree, when you're planting a new tree from a nursery, absolutely 100% take the stake off. Okay, you're gonna look at the trunk. I want you to wiggle the trunk with your hand and see how much wiggle there is in that trunk. Okay, and the more wiggle there is, the more you need to chop off from the top. You need to start chopping, chopping, chopping on the top until the point that when you shake, there's not that much wiggle. Okay, and so I know this seems kind of drastic for a lot of people, but sometimes I'll buy a tree, it's like 5 feet tall, and I'll cut it in half because the tree cannot support that amount of top growth. I'm actually going to do that. I bought a persimmon tree here. It's like 4.5 feet tall. I'm probably going to cut it right in half. And then we're going to let the regrowth happen slowly. And as the regrowth happens, right, the tree is going to feel that movement from the wind. And as it feels the movement from the wind, it's going to start to brace up its trunk, and it's going to start to develop some girth. It's going to be really important for fruit trees because fruit trees need to carry weight. So we don't want this like spindly little trunk, right? We want a nice, sturdy, strong trunk. I see a lot of people on Facebook posting about their fruit trees, and like they've put all these crazy supports. They've built like this 2x4 structure around the tree. They're tying it up on all these things. Like we don't want to have to do that. Okay, we want the tree to be able to support the weight of the fruit. The other thing with this is like we don't want the tree to be like you don't need to prune off all the bottom branches and make it into a shade tree where all the weight's on the top. You can leave the lower branches, actually cut the top of the tree lower, bring the tree lower so that the weight's not all hanging off the ends and causing the tree to, I've literally had trees split in half because they were pruned improperly. The trunk, literally, you have a tree like with a split in the trunk like that, and the branches aren't strong. There's a lot of weight on the end, and those branches will literally break the tree in half. You don't want that to happen. Okay, another question here. I probably just have time for 1 or 2 more. Is there a benefit of a particular cover crop around trees to give them space, or better to give them space? I'm not really sure what this question is saying. Caitlin Rogers, could you write that again? I'm not understanding how it's written. Narendra asks, does fruit tree with does a fruit tree with multiple varieties grafted on the same trunk work well in a home garden? Quick answer to that, generally no. I would prefer you just plant different variety trees. The issue with these multi-graft trees, so again, if you don't know what this is, it's like one trunk. You have one branch of one variety, one branch of another variety, one branch of a third or fourth variety. They usually sell these trees for quite expensive, like $200 plus. Each of those varieties is going to grow at a different rate. And so a lot of times what I see happening is one variety is super strong. And so that one variety just pulls all the energy from the trunk towards itself. And so you'll have this one branch that's going like crazy. And then there's usually 2 that are doing okay. And then the last one is usually just like barely hanging on. It's getting shaded out by the other varieties. So yeah, I would recommend just instead to plant multiple different trees. If you want to have more varieties, just plan to put your trees closer together and then prune them to be smaller. So we'll probably do one of these on pruning in the winter, but just to say briefly, like you can prune any fruit tree to any size. So if you want to keep your tree only 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide, you can. So if you want to have, instead of planting a multi-graft plum tree, plant 3 different plum trees, plant them close together, prune them heavily. Okay, and now Caitlin asks, is it better for the tree to have a cover crop around it or just a wood chip mulch? That's a difficult question to answer. Most important thing is to have some cover over the soil, whether it's a cover crop or a wood chip mulch. I'm not going to say one or the other. But yeah, just make sure the soil's covered. And you don't have to be like religious about this either. If there's some area of your garden where the soil's not covered, don't worry about it. Actually, there's a lot of insects. There's like some bees that burrow in the ground that need some exposed soil. So have some area. Actually, you should have some area exposed. You don't need to cover everything, right? Some people get a little religious about this stuff. Diversity is important. Some cover, some mild cover, some deep cover, some planted, some unplanted. It's all good. Okay, I think I can do one more. Whoever wants to raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. Yeah, Swada, go ahead. Oh, actually, Swada, I got one here from Sarah Jo. Sarah Jo, go ahead.
Hi, Famarishi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Okay, so I put a question in the chat, so I don't know if you can answer both of these, but one was about what you thought about the Griffith Park composting facility. They have free mulch, but they also have free compost. I've gotten the mulch there before, and it's just the mulch. I don't think there's a problem with the mulch, but I wondered what you thought about the compost, actually. Just a second question would be, I have a pretty old avocado that's like, probably 60 years old or something. So it's quite large, and it does bear fruit. I keep it mulched all the time, a lot of leaves, all of that, but I don't almost ever really fertilize it. So I'm sort of been listening a lot to what you're saying and thinking, well, maybe I should do like a nice layer of compost, in addition to the mulch that's already both adding some and the leaf, both wood mulch and leaf. And what you think about that, and if you would think like a 6-foot diameter kind of thing, just because I don't want to go too crazy with the mulch, because 3 inches would be quite a lot in that size.
All right, let me ask you your first question about the city compost. I have heard a few people have had issues with LA City compost because they use sewage waste in their composting facilities. I think some of the composting city facilities use sewage waste and some don't. So you probably want to call and ask if that one uses sewage waste. Again,
I think there's a lot of from the zoo, because it's very near. The one that's in Griffith Park is like, that's what it's sort of known for. They call it zoo. Yeah. Zoo. So anyway, yeah, zoo.
I would probably be okay with like the zoo one. I would probably be okay with, because they might be giving the animals, like I've heard they give the animals a lot of medicine, but I would assume most of that would break down.
I see. Okay.
But the sewage waste is going to have like a lot of pharmaceuticals. I think one person I knew got it and they had it tested and it was very high in lead, which is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're going to use human manure, just use your own. Don't use the cities.
Okay. Thank you on that one.
And then your second question about the avocado. You said the avocado is 60 years old?
Well, I mean, I've been here 30 years and I'm sure it was, it's like taller than the house. It's a single story house. And
on the trunk, what are we talking here? Like,
so the trunk is like, like 3 to 4 feet and 3 feet diameter, 3.5, something around there.
Okay. All right. So your avocado probably has roots like through your whole property by now.
Okay.
So you don't need to specifically, and I wouldn't amend around the trunk. I would amend, everywhere else. So if you're, whatever you do to apply compost or mulch anywhere in your yard is going to benefit this avocado tree.
Okay, that's good.
And tell your neighbors too, because it's got roots probably in their yard too.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so thank you all for joining today. I'll just reiterate here that this is going to be done through our nonprofit Sarvodaya Institute. And if you want to join us next month, you can go to our website. I'll put it in again in the chat, and sign up for the membership, just $5 a month as a donation to our nonprofit. And again, same format next month, half an hour of a gardening lesson and half an hour of your questions. And yeah, so happy so many of you joined us today. Thank you. Nana, you want to say something, Nana? You got to unmute. Nana, you got to unmute yourself. He's figuring it out. This is my grandfather. Oh, maybe I can do it for him.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can all hear you.
It was a very educational information that you gave. Even though I have done a lot, I still have learned quite a bit from your information on mulching and everything. Could I ask you a question? This horse manure, can it be used instead of the mulch? And then you put on top of it, the bark or whatever.
Yeah. You could definitely, he's got a good point. I would actually use the horse manure instead of the compost. I would put horse manure and then put the wood chips on top of the horse manure.
Right.
If you leave the horse manure on the top, you'll probably get a lot of flies.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you put the horse manure.
Yeah, I meant the same thing, instead of mulch, you put that thing over there.
Yeah.
Under the mulch.
Yeah,
Good.
under the mulch. Yeah.
I'm interested in becoming your member.
Thank you, Now.
I like it. Very good.
All right. Thank you all for joining, and hope to see many of you next month.
Leaving?
Yep. I'm going to close it right now.
Bye.
Bye.